I decided to do my project on special education in secondary instrumental music classrooms. As educators, we're likely familiar with the concept of cultural diversity and the need for students to develop an understanding of their multi-ethnic world and community. Teaching students with disabilities is something I'm passionate about, and I wanted to make sure I really got a chance to research it while I was in school. This quote intrigued me because I wanted to make sure that not only do I teach for the benefit of students who have special needs, but also for the benefit of my students and be a role model in just working with those students. I wanted that to be a main part of my teaching experience. So I wanted to look at how important this is, because it can't just be important to me, it has to be important to several other people who I know. There are 22,000 students in District 51. And so with that said, I also researched how many students with disabilities are getting care from District 51, and that is about 3,000. So it comes down to it's about 7% of the total student body, which is larger than I thought it would be. And so that makes it very important, because that's probably also true in a lot of other areas as well. You're going to see special needs students, and you're going to have to come up with some ways to be creative and make sure that you have musical experiences with them. To learn more, I decided to make a survey. So the purpose of the survey was to figure out what kind of disabilities that teachers in the Grand Valley accommodate to, and what the kind of students that they come into contact with and have learned from, and and their students as well, and made it in their classrooms. So I sent out the survey to 19 instrumental music teachers, and I had 15 participants total. I had it open for 30 days, and it includes about 15 questions. So my first two were these two questions. I didn't want to ask specifically who my participants were, even though I had emailed all these people, but I wanted to see just some kind of nameless data, if you will. So I had a lot of responses for band, not very many for orchestra, which is pretty typical of the Valley, but I also wrote a question for how long have you been teaching instrumental music for? A good number of them were over 21 years, which was awesome. That means I had a lot of experience, but I also had a bunch from 10 to 20, and a lot from 1 to 5, but I didn't have any between less than a year or between 6 and 10 years. Some general accommodations I saw when I was making my project is I saw a lot of all of these in mind, and these are all great to keep in mind anyway. They're all good classroom management strategies. A couple on this list I want to talk about was just allow more time to complete assignments. A lot of students have disabilities whether it be intellectual or speech related, just give them extra time and be reasonable with them. Clear communication is also a really big one, because a lot of them need routines and have ideas and expectations, and if you can communicate with them on their level, they're more likely to respond well to your teaching methods. Also refer to that student's individualized educational plan, and refer to aides or their SPED instructor who is in your area. So the first one I studied was speech and language impairments. 73.3% of my respondents said that they've taught a student with these kinds of disabilities, and I wanted to talk about them. These are communication disorders, can also include hard of hearing in these teaching methods, such as stuttering, impaired articulation, language, or voice impairments. So one that I saw was give students an opportunity to put in brief oral answers, or also written work. So a lot of these students who have a hard time communicating are really good with just writing, so let them write. If you have to have them prepare oral answers, give them time, make sure they know that this is something they're doing in class today, and then be a role model. So make sure students understand that it's respectful to make sure that they let people finish their sentences and not interrupt. And also this might be a good place for a student in the percussion section, orchestra, or maybe even a reed instrument. If they like the feeling of vibration, that might be a good tool for them and a good instrument for them to mess with. So I've got one for emotional and behavioral disorders. Mainly this is ADHD. Can include several other disorders, and the list could be really extensive, but I wanted to focus on ADHD for the purpose of my project. So the definition of ADHD just includes people who struggle with maintaining attention, have impulse behaviors, and or motor restlessness. So these students may not have an IEP, but they're just students who have just a rough time in class. So make sure you repeat directions and expectations, you post your rehearsal plan visually, and then you can alter your seating arrangements to help support those students in that way. There's a little graphic here that I pulled up about just different ways to keep students engaged and have strategies for those students as well. So there's one for pace, there's one for movement. Movement's huge. I know there's one that I saw a long time ago about like having a exercise ball in the classroom, and I just don't think that would go well in a band classroom, so don't do that. But there's lots of other ways that you can impact those students. Physical disabilities is another one. So this is another long list. I don't want to super name a lot, but they basically end up with people who are in wheelchairs and these people may have different just disorders and disabilities, and you have to be able to take it by case and really look at what's going to benefit the student. But safety is a huge issue, so if you have a student with a wheelchair in class, make sure you have apt room for them and keep them safe. Grip support is also another one. So I read an article about a teacher who had a student who was a percussion student, and then she wrapped sponges around the mallets so they can grip them better. And there's also so many adaptive instruments. I wanted to give one example. So here's a YouTube video for you. This student is playing on a MIDI instrument that has a lot of sounds. So you can really just go with the student and figure out what's the best place for them in the band. There's like all sorts of sounds associated with it. So here's the video. So there's your video for you. I'll head back to my slideshow here. And that was just a great example of what students can do. She's just blowing air into the instrument and it's playing what she wants it to play. It works a little bit like a harmonica, and there's that name at the bottom if you wanted to research it a little bit more. Visual disabilities was another one that I thought would be more of a hit, but that's not really a thing. But visual disabilities are an impactful classroom disability. So go ahead and look at the slide. It's got the Braille on it. You could actually teach sighted students and Braille students at the same time. Louis Braille, who created the system, actually created the system to work that way. So go ahead and use that. There's a lot of method books out there, slightly on the more expensive side, but I know Standard of Excellence and Alfred both have really great method books for this, and they also have a lot of transcription services, so you can use a lot of these technologies here to help your students excel in the classroom. Developmental disabilities are also another one, so this includes students who are dealing with autism or Asperger's or just various intellectual disabilities. Autism basically varies widely in behavior and abilities, but can include unusual responses to sensory experiences, engagement in repetitive activities and stereotypical movements, and they can have resistance to environmental change or change in daily routines. So a lot of these students in the Valley deal with with autism. Actually 7 to 8% of District 51 special needs students deal with this. So there's a good chance that if you have a special needs student, you'll probably have an autistic student at some point. I saw a video of an autistic student who was doing really well in the percussion section, and he used a lot of multisensory methods to teach the student. One example I saw was an African drum circle, and the teacher associated each of the notes and drums with colors. And so students were then reading the music, associating it with colors, because that is definitely an autistic method to teach, is with color. They love color. They can also be overstimulated very easily, and it's also really helpful to practice concerts in advance. So if you can do that, that really helps them figure out what's going on, how am I going to be situated, what's the plan. Individualized educational plans are a big part of special education, so I want to bring that up as well. The purpose of those is just to improve educational results while students are in inclusive classrooms. We want to make sure that it's also has a purpose for setting higher expectations and making sure parents are included in the children's education. So IEPs are generally 4 pages long, can be longer, but the things you should look for when you read an IEP are these 3 things. the current level of academia and function that helps you figure out how the student works in a classroom and what accommodations they already have in other classrooms. It also tells you how the student's progress is measured and documented, and you need to document this as well. And it also tells you how often a report is given to parents. So just some final thoughts for you. It's completely possible to accommodate to every student that you teach, whether that student has special needs or not. And also that humans are full of expression and creativity, so why not foster that in your classroom by figuring out ways to include everybody. And then lastly, I know as a teacher, I want to make sure that I create opportunities for inclusion and diversity, and these are all ways that I get to complete that. Thanks, guys.